The Spin-Off Podcast Network.
Kia ora, this is Toby. You've probably heard me banging on Gone by Lunchtime about this new podcast that I and a group of my colleagues have been working on for the last 6, 7, 8 months. It's called Juggernaut, the story of the fourth Labour government. It's about those crazy roller coaster years. You might have already listened to it, but we thought we would slot it in here on the GBL feed so you could have a little taste. Every episode after this one will be on the Juggernaut feed itself. You can find that if you go to the show notes, or you can just search in your podcast provider for Juggernaut, the story of the fourth Labour government. Hope you like it. Maybe you already listened to it. I don't know. Maybe you want to listen to it again. Maybe you can just share it with your friends, your family, your domestic animals. Juggernaut, story of the fourth Labour government. Here it is.
This podcast was made with the support of New Zealand On Air.
Tēnā koutou katoa. This is Toby Manhire for the Spin-Off Podcast Network. It's June 2024. When we started out making this podcast, we had the working title 1984. This podcast is not called 1984. That title is very much taken and has some quite particular connotations. In any case, our story goes well beyond that year. We were calling it that because it's such a momentous year for New Zealand. A dam burst in 1984 and let rip this incredible period of change in politics and culture, in nationhood, in the bloodstream of Aotearoa. So we set out to tell that story, and we've interviewed a whole lot of people along the way. How many do you reckon in total, T.I. here?
Like 21, 22?
That's T.I. here Butler, audio editor and sound designer, and executive director of the Spin-Off Special Effects Division. So we've interviewed a whole bunch of people who have generously given us their time, and we've dived into the archives to stitch it all together as best we can. It's the story of a rupture, a transformation, a whole catalogue of transformations, which today are variously celebrated and condemned and mythologised and contested. Many of those involved are still feeling the whiplash, 40 years on. 1984 was an election year in New Zealand. It witnessed a profound generational change, with a young, wildly ambitious Labour government elected, led by a charismatic Prime Minister, David Lange. This series is called Juggernaut. It's the story of the fourth Labour government.
You can't govern unless you're certain.
It is our absolute commitment to the future of this country that we believe it is our time.
He's a buffoon, and we're talking about the serious business of governing this country in very difficult times.
We are going to turn ourselves away from the division, and we are going to lead this country together to put some hope back into our people and for this country to become again a nation.
June 14, 1984.
We got a date, the 14th of July, which we've worked out at Government House as being the appropriate date.
This is an image scorched deeply into the national retina. An unsteady, slurring Sir Rob Muldoon faces a media pack outside his beehive office with a sinister grin. It's late. So late that by now it's technically the next day, about midnight on June the 15th.
That doesn't give him much time to run up to an election, Prime Minister.
Doesn't give my opponents much time to run up to an election, does it?
That deranged, belligerent, boozy night sets in motion the first snap election since 1951. It springs the trigger on one of the most gobsmacking periods in New Zealand history, a gravity-defying experiment. David Lange heralds a new beginning, but not even he can know the sheer scale of what is to follow. Upheavals in foreign policy, social and cultural transformations, the developed world's most regulated economy is hailed as its least regulated in what seems like the blink of an eye. What follows will be profound, and it will be painful. 40 years on, the children of that revolution are still grappling with its consequences. Episode 1. I love you, Mr. Lange.
What do you think you're up to now, you perverted little liar?
Man, the cow doesn't really know what he's talking about.
It was incredible. He was absolutely trolleyed.
You just felt that you were in some alternative universe.
Let's jump back a day. It's June 13, the winter of 1984. An industrial dispute is playing out at Marsden Point. The first Police Academy film is screening in cinemas. So is Footloose, the title song of which is top of the New Zealand charts. Can we play a bit of Kenny Loggins?
Absolutely not.
In Parliament, which on June 13 is only sitting for the 9th day of the year, a nuclear-free New Zealand bill is tabled. One of a few that had been kicking around, this one a member's bill in the name of Richard Prebble.
So I'd been in Parliament 3 terms, and each term I had brought up the bill. The first time I brought it up, the Labour caucus was actually against me doing it. But I said, well, this is a private member's bill, and there's no rule of the caucus that prevents me. You fellas have to make up your own minds how you're going to vote. I'm going to do it, which didn't make me too popular.
This time, the Labour caucus is fully behind the bill. 2 national MPs crossed the floor to support it, the most prominent being Marilyn Waring, who had become New Zealand's youngest MP when she was elected at the age of 23, 9 years earlier. A thorn in Muldoon's side, she'd already announced she wasn't seeking re-election. National has just a 1-seat majority, but the bill fails thanks to a pair of ex-Labour independents. That night, Marilyn Waring can't sleep. Not because the bill got voted down, but something else. She'd been told by senior National MPs that had the bill won a parliamentary majority, they'd have stopped it in its tracks by refusing to send it to the Governor-General to be signed into law.
And that to me was just a complete outrage. Like, this is okay. I'm not in a democracy anymore, right? I've been pushed and pushed and pushed, and this is just absolutely one push too far.
Waring doesn't want to bring down the government in a confidence vote, but she is very much ready to provoke Muldoon into calling an election. The next morning she goes straight to the Clerk of the House, who gives her the assurance she seeks, that she could resign from caucus without triggering a by-election. Then she writes to Don McKinnon. At this point, he's National's chief whip, responsible for keeping an eye on how MPs vote. She explains that she will no longer be part of the caucus, but it comes with an assurance on nuclear and rape issues she'll vote with her conscience. Otherwise, the government can count on her support.
Then I went to the Hunter Building at Victoria University and went to a violin masterclass and sat and listened to that. It was back to one of my old haunts. I'd studied some music at Vic, and it was just a way of me just, breathing for a little while. Then I had lunch over in the Vic gym with another friend. I went back and nothing had happened. Like, I'd sent the letter to McKinnon and nothing had happened. Nothing.
Waring had a pre-arranged dinner with a group of women to discuss strategy on reproductive freedom issues.
And so I went out to dinner with them, and when I came back, my office desk was littered with messages. Please ring Sue Wood urgently. Please ring Barry Lay urgently. Please ring Don McKinnon urgently. Please come to a meeting in the whip's office. And I went off to the meeting in the whip's office, but I changed into my tracksuit first.
When she gets there, there's Don McKinnon, the chief whip. There's the National Party General Director, Barry Lay, and Sue Wood, the party president. And then, all of a sudden, Muldoon appears at the door.
Oh, well, he just thundered on in, really.
Muldoon, Lay would later say, is already pissed as a fiddler's cat.
What do you think you're up to now, you perverted little liar? I think was the opening gambit. And I smiled because I thought, it's over. There's no accommodation going to go on here. There's no reconciliation, with the first line. It's all right. It's over. I've just got to make it through however long this takes now. Yeah, so that's basically how it was. It was pretty rugged for a couple of hours.
Over the course of those hours, Muldoon drinks several brandy and gingers, a departure from his usual tipple, whiskey.
It was a pretty sober room, other than the Prime Minister.
Waring had brought her own prop of choice, an apple.
Well, I didn't know how long I would be there. I thought, listen, if he's going to be a total pig, I'm just going to eat the apple. Because if I'm talking to somebody and they're eating an apple, it drives me nuts. Because, how can they hear me? So I took an apple.
And you had cause to eat it?
I ate it, yeah. While he just raved on.
At that moment, across town at Government House, Sir David Beattie is hosting a media dinner.
There was a plethora of media heavyweights in the House, all of them, of course, being male, as it was New Zealand and it was 1984.
Margie Beattie, the Governor-General's daughter, is in her 20s and back staying with her parents.
And I think on that evening, I had probably joined them for a drink or something. And because I had a renal problem, I wasn't drinking alcohol, so mine would have been a glass of water. And then they all repaired off into the dining room and had a meal.
Among the sea of dinner suits that night is Jim Macleay, the Deputy Prime Minister.
I knew there had been a problem brewing with whether we had retained sufficient support within Parliament. I didn't know the detail, but that was for the whips to manage. And we'd gone to Government House and I had a sense that, something was in the wind. Then I got a message at the table, the dinner table. I can't quite remember how the message came. I have a vision of somebody whispering in my ear. I had to go back to Parliament. And it was then that I was told that we had lost our support.
Waring goes back to her office, where her dinner companions have been waiting. The office is on the third floor of Parliament buildings, and you can tell it's hers from the sticker on the door, which says, "This is a nuclear-free zone." It happens also to be right next door to the National Caucus room. It's about 10:30 p.m. at this point.
I get up and I go and lock the door to my room. And they said, "What's all that noise?" I said, "Oh, there's an urgent government caucus meeting." Well, they said, "Don't you have to go?" "Oh, no," I said, "I caused it." And so, obviously very little is said and there's some very disheartened, slow little bit of clapping.
Jim Macleay has made it back in time for that meeting.
It was presented very much to the caucus as a fait accompli. By and large, events had already taken their course.
Muldoon emerges into the corridor, surrounded by senior colleagues, including Macleay, still in his tux.
The purpose of the caucus was to discuss the fact that Miss Waring withdrew from the caucus, and although she gave us an undertaking to vote for government measures, with the exception of those that related to nuclear arms, defence and rape, we could not accept the fact that with her withdrawal we still had a majority, and we must thus have a general election, and I propose to proceed to Government House now.
The Prime Minister sets off across town to persuade the Governor-General of the need for an election. Marilyn Waring is still in her office.
Then the press all come clambering to the door, and by now I've moved a table over against the door and got under the desk.
One of Waring's friends, Brenda Cuttress, stands on the table and pokes her head out the window above.
And says, "Yes, can I help you?" She went to a meeting and she hasn't come back. We don't know where she is.
Back at Government House, the Governor-General's daughter, Margie, grabs her coat and darts out the grand front doors to head off out with her boyfriend.
So I could see that there was a car there, but didn't take note of anything more than that, and opened up the door to the then Prime Minister, Rob Muldoon, and then in quick measure behind me was someone to receive him. And then he was taken very quickly to Dad's study. Many people have asked me, "Oh gosh, was he really drunk when he arrived?" And I actually didn't smell anything on his breath. I didn't really think any more than he was agitated. And all I can remember is that when I was going to the front door, there were a whole lot of people rushing around trying to find a telephone.
If Muldoon is not drunk at this point, he's working on it. While waiting for Beattie in his study, Muldoon took care of 2 large glasses of whiskey, his senior aide Gerald Hensley would later write. At Parliament, David Lange speaks to reporters. "This is a day of deliverance," he says.
For the second time in 100 years of constitutional government in New Zealand, a government has had to throw in the towel, and it has thrown in the towel tonight. And my colleagues and I are going to be in there. We know of all the bad economic indicators which meant that the retiring Prime Minister could not draw up a budget. but we pledge ourselves to solid, responsible, measured recovery in New Zealand.
At 12:15, Muldoon arrives back at the Beehive from Government House. The Governor-General has given him what he seeks. There will be an election on July 14.
Doesn't give my opponents much time to run up to an election, does it?
He goes on to say,
I've just been with His Excellency for about an hour talking about the constitutional aspects of this, and he said, yes, you have a majority, you can advise me. You tell me that you are not confident of having a majority to see the government through this parliamentary session, and you advise me that you should go to the country, and I accept that advice.
Muldoon returns to his office and hits the scotch. At this point, he's a bit of a mess. According to his biographer, Barry Gustafson, on top of the booze, he has 3 medications swirling around his system: for diabetes, for high blood pressure, and for a bad back. Eventually, around 2 a.m, he heads for the basement car park, all set to drive home in his beloved blue Triumph 2500. Don McKinnon had anticipated this course of action and sent a staffer ahead. When Muldoon arrives at last in the basement, he finds the tyres flat and instead slouches into the chauffeur-driven Crown limo. Marilyn Waring has by then been smuggled out of Parliament. The next morning, she flies north and goes into hiding. Media are camped at her house, so she stays with friends in Hamilton before heading to Australia for the course of the campaign. In Marilyn's absence, Radio New Zealand instead calls up her dad. Bill Waring had sparked his daughter's interest in politics when she was just 11, and he gave her Bertrand Russell's Common Sense and Nuclear War.
Well, we've been battlers all our lives, sir, and we've adopted one policy right through it. This above all, to thine own self be true, regardless of cost. Money doesn't come into it when there's a status of principle at hand.
And do you think your daughter has carried through with that principle?
I think so, for the whole term that she's been in Parliament. This is the way it's got to be, this is the way it's got to be, but there will be 2 heads held very high, hers and mine. So I'm looking at the wall here now, and on this wall in my office there's lots of little comments and statements, and one that reminds me of Marilyn is, it's the swimmer who first leaps into the frozen stream, who is cut sharpest by the ice. Those who follow find it broken, and the last find it gone.
There's an amazing photo from 1979, reproduced on the front page of Marilyn Waring's book, The Political Years. The photo shows the National Party caucus curling down the circular staircase into the Beehive foyer like a flow of grey magma, with the squat Muldoon at the base. But the odd one out, the only woman, is Marilyn Waring. What was it like to be in a group like that?
Well, it's like being on another planet if you're 23 and a feminist. Yeah. I mean, most of your life is pretty confined to particular rules and particular ways of doing things, and all the times of the day that you have to be here, there, or everywhere. I think the cabinet, the National Cabinet at the end of 1975, either a half to 2/3 of them had served in the Second World War. So truly, they're just in a different universe from me.
And Muldoon?
He was completely patriarchal, old school. Power is only about power over people. Power is only about getting people to do what you want. The idea that you actually would have power for people or power with people or power to work with people, these would not be concepts of power with which he would have any patience. So he used intimidation. He was a big bully.
Robert Muldoon, or Sir Robert Muldoon as he becomes when knighted while still Prime Minister, rules New Zealand with a clenched fist. Pugnacious, abrasive, his instincts are protectionist and his mode paternalistic. His vision of New Zealand is made in the mould of what he calls the ordinary bloke.
We don't need a new society.
Here he is in 78, at the end of his first term as Prime Minister.
That's what the Labor Party is trying to bring us. That's their slogan, a new society. What's wrong with the one we've got? What's wrong with the one that we built up here over 150 years? People who came to this country to get away from the old societies, to found a new society here in New Zealand. What's wrong with that? We don't need the advice of self-appointed experts, the intellectuals of this country, to tell us that we want a new society.
Everyone who meets Muldoon in the flesh has that moment imprinted on their memory. Are you at the pub, Gary?
Of course I am.
Good.
You got nothing to do with my life? Of course I'm at the pub. And this is them.
To be fair to Gary McCormick, he's down at his Littleton local for a community meeting. But I want to hear about his Muldoon encounter.
I ended up in his office in the Beehive because I had to have a photograph taken with Sam Hunt by Peter Bush, the sports photographer who was coming up to take a photo of Sam and I and Muldoon. I have no idea how this happened. But I was the first person there, and there was no one in Muldoon's office, and suddenly the door opened and Muldoon came out. So it was just him and me together. And we were looking down on Molesworth Street. And it was the day of the Springbok Tour protest, and all these people were marching up Molesworth Street, and I'm looking out the window and Muldoon standing beside me. And I said, "This doesn't look good." And he said, "Ha ha," he said, "it's going to be good for me at the next election, Gary."
The sound you're hearing is the sound of police batons raining down on shields and crash helmets of protesters. Protesters regrouped themselves just opposite the police lines a short time ago and made a charge. This time they were for real after a number of dummy runs where they went up to police lines and then relaxed at the last minute and withdrew.
In the face of global energy crises, Muldoon has launched Think Big, a public building program on a huge scale. Dams, steel plants, smelters. Some of it works, some of it doesn't, but it's all incredibly expensive. New Zealanders plunge deep into debt and a tailspin of inflation. Rising prices, rising wages, rising rents, rising interest rates. Muldoon needs to make it stop, and so he does. He stops it by decree.
The freeze on incomes will be matched by a freeze on prices. The prices of goods and services will not be allowed to rise above their normal levels applying at midnight tonight.
And this is all on top of a catalogue of subsidies, tariffs, and import licences that are like golden tickets to those who hold them. You need government approval to get hold of foreign currency. You need government approval to subscribe to a magazine from overseas. It takes, on average, 9 weeks to get a phone installed.
New Zealand was a very grey place.
The state had vast commercial interests, banks, insurance companies, railways, ports, airports, coal mines, forests.
But, there wasn't really an underclass then.
Sir Robert, ironically, didn't believe in the market at all, as far as I could tell, so he then legislated for everything. And he was in the face of a global situation going in the opposite direction. So disaster was awaiting us, I think.
New Zealand was a total command economy.
The economy in New Zealand wasn't just failing, it had failed.
On one hand, he's credited with kind of reaching out to the gangs, and on the other hand, he was, seen as being pretty spendthrift and unaccountable.
He was a highly intelligent man, a very good public speaker.
He was a tough operator. People were scared of him.
He was a very odd individual. His relationship with journalists was tense.
Tom Scott is banned from press conferences. Dashing young reporter Barry Soper is the subject of a complaint to the Speaker. The Dominion newspaper is stonewalled.
Dominating, ruthless, and very much of a loner.
When Geoffrey Palmer arrives in Parliament in 1979, Muldoon immediately denounces a dangerous left-wing academic.
Yes, that was me. Muldoon was the master of invective and personal attack. I'd say that he ended up as an autocrat because the portfolios he was Prime Minister and Minister of Finance, that you end up talking to yourself with that sort of situation. He was also Minister in charge of the Legislative Department, Leader of the House, and he had the 2 security services under his wing. Now, that meant that he was really in charge of anything that mattered. He was a populist, quite a populist, and he used to conduct campaigns against people, and it seemed to have enhanced his popularity.
One of those campaigns is against Labour MP Colin Moyle.
He got involved in a parliamentary spat with Moyle and accused him of being picked up by the police for homosexual conduct. And Moyle denied it. He set up a commission of inquiry headed by Sir Alfred North to go into that. And that inquiry was manifestly unlawful. And that was very sad for Moyle. And Moyle ended up resigning from Parliament over that.
That resignation in 1977 creates a by-election in Mangere. A 34-year-old called David Lange swiftly throws up his hand. It helps that he grew up in South Auckland. He was part of the Methodist Church and his father a well-known GP.
In South Auckland, you don't have to go around explaining why your name, which is spelled Lange, is pronounced Lange. I mean, it was a name in South Auckland, and I owe him an awful lot because of that.
Lange's wife Naomi, whom he'd met on his OE in the UK, supported his political ambitions, up to a point. This is from that same 1982 interview.
Because I understand that jokingly she said that if you ever became Prime Minister, she'd divorce you.
Yes, she didn't believe there was any possibility of that having ever to be implemented, that threat, nor did I.
I suspect I'm the reason he became an MP, because I became an MP and he then thought, well, any mug can obviously do it. We wrote his selection speech on my kitchen table.
Richard Prebble had known Lange for years. For a time they worked together as lawyers in Auckland.
David Lange was one of those people once seen, never forgotten. He is one of the 3 biggest men I've ever seen in my life. He had black hair that used to go over his forehead and heavy black glasses. So when I was a young lawyer, he was a fixture in the magistrates' court and amazing. Encyclopedic knowledge. He represented all the down and outs. Crims and other people who other lawyers refused to represent. I can remember after we'd been practising for a year, I said to him, look, David, we've got a bit of a problem. And he said, what's that? And I said, well, you're a saint and I'm a lawyer. And I don't mind the fact that you represent all these rat bags, but why don't you at least get them to turn out their pockets and take what money they've got? You're charging them nothing.
At the end of 1979, Lange becomes deputy leader. He's growing in popularity, but his health is not good. Weighing around 178 kilograms, Lange has surgery to staple his stomach.
First of all, I tried not to have it a matter of public interest, and things leaked and various bulletins were sent out, and it became quite obvious that I had to do something about it. But the other thing was that I was rather moved by the people who, even when I was in hospital, wrote to me pretty desperate letters in some cases. I hope that people who saw the program and who have read the interviews will not regard it as a bit of pop surgery. It's not something to be undertaken lightly. But at the same time, I am satisfied from having met a number of people, and it's surprising, the number of people in public places that'll sidle up to you and say, I used to be 21 stone, and look at me, I'm 11.
It gives Lange a fresh lease of life. He gets a new suit, sharper spectacles. People are talking about him. Shortly after the operation, at the encouragement of Labour MP Mike Moore, Bob Harvey heads to Mangere for a meeting with Lange.
He said, oh, I'm alive. And I said, you are alive, and I think I'd love to work with you.
Harvey is a top Auckland ad man, and he's a long-standing Labour guy. He'd been instrumental in the campaign that led Norman Kirk to power in 1972.
And I thought, God, he's good. Oh, this guy is so good. He's the answer to everything we want.
But not everyone in Labour circles agrees that Lange is the leader they're looking for.
They said, what are you talking about? He's a buffoon. He's a fool. He's a fat fool. If you know him, you can't talk to him. He just quips. Like, whoa, nice dress, nice shoes. What the hell are you wearing those for?
Lange is brilliant, but only in bursts.
That was the secret, that he didn't have enough air. He didn't have enough breath to actually have a big conversation.
Harvey enlists Jonathan Hardy, director of the Mercury Theatre just off K Road. Hardy and Harvey are both into the theories and therapies of Austrian psychoanalyst Wilhelm Reich.
And I said to Jonathan, I've got this guy, and I have to kill you if you talk about it, but he's going to be the Prime Minister. And he said, oh, yeah? Well, you were talking to David Lange? I said, yeah, David Lange. I said, he seems like he needs to bring himself together somehow. And I saw a training program that he had done, which was quite brutal, screaming, shouting. I guess it was part of the Reichian thing.
He reckons it might work for Lange.
They really liked each other. And Lange said, oh, yeah, I can do what I want. And Hardy said, no, you can't. You can't breathe. You've got no air. And he got up and said, open your shirt for me. Lange opened his shirt, kind of a bit reluctantly. And Jonathan pressed his chest and said, what's in there? What's in there? What's in there?
Lange agrees to a second session with Hardy.
He said to David, take your shoes off. Take your shoes off. And take your shirt off. David took his shirt off. He had a singlet on, Marlon Brando, but not Marlon Brando underneath. And they started. And again, after about 10 minutes, he just looked at me and said, wait in the car.
Over several weeks, says Harvey, Lange sheds his body inhibitions and learns to breathe.
And it was a great relationship. He was kind of pulling David, not apart, but he was opening up David. And he said to me later, he said, he won't face people because of the mass of body which is still there. I've got to open him up. I thought it was a fascinating, amazing process to this beautiful, articulate, glorious, witty man.
In 1981, a group of Labour MPs, who will become known as the Fish and Chip Brigade, moved to replace their likeable but uncharismatic leader, Bill Rowling, with David Lange. That coup fails, but soon Rowling sees the writing on the wall. In 1983, Lange is elected to replace him and squares up with Muldoon in the House.
Put your stewardship to the test. Have your deputy with you. Fight as a team. The best team. Put the best team forward. Really, man for man, sweep them. Get them all going. Get them growing. Tell them about jobs for your children, your children's children. It's the dog's bark and the flag's wave.
The most determined and experienced member of that Fish and Chip Brigade backing Lange is the MP for Manurewa.
Roger Douglas, 86 years of age. Sometimes I feel 75, other times I feel 99.
Sir Roger Douglas is in good cheer when he arrives in the studio. The taxi dropped him at the building next door to the spin-off, Unite Union, and he joked that it looked like a trap. Douglas has politics in the genes.
Absolutely. My grandfather was a member of Parliament for 25 years, 1935 through to 60. He was a member of Walter Nash's cabinet. My father was a trade union secretary. He was in Parliament for 12 years and was president of the Labour Party for a number of years. So in those circumstances, you either sort of love it or hate it.
Back in 1972, Roger Douglas, then just 34 years old, had been elected to Norman Kirk's cabinet. His father, Norman, missed out.
It was a difficult moment for me. If I could have swapped position, I'd have happily done it. Yeah, he'd given a long time to the Labour Party. Obviously made a number of enemies within the caucus during that period. And he went close, but he didn't make it.
Roger Douglas has heard about this swashbuckling young lawyer, David Lange, but the first time he sees him is at the Mangere selection meeting.
Lange that night was terrific, no doubt about that. And you could almost tell that he was going to win. Didn't matter whether it was on a stage or on the back of a truck. He had that magic at that time.
Roger Douglas, for his own part, is impatient. Back in 1980, he'd been spokesperson for transport. He released an alternative budget. Then Labour leader Bill Rowling fired him from the front bench.
I guess if you look at my whole career, I've never actually been sort of tied. You know, I've been someone who I would like to think thought outside the box, and on that occasion I just felt the need to say something. I thought that New Zealand was going down the drain, that the National Party weren't taking it anywhere. More particularly, I didn't think that the Labour Party was offering any real alternative, and I'd worked out what I believed and I wanted to say it. I think I probably got the sack for that.
About a year later, in the lead up to the 1981 election, Douglas is ready to chuck it in.
I didn't think that we in the Labour Party were putting up an alternative. And the alternative I wanted to do was quite radical.
Douglas tells his fellow MPs he's over it. He shares the news with his Labour Party electorate committee in Manurewa. They're not thrilled about it. And then, and this is a bit of a sliding doors moment, David Lange turns up and starts talking. Lange's the Labour deputy leader at this point, but if he were to become leader, he tells the room, then Roger is his man, his money guy, his finance minister in waiting. Douglas changes his mind. He stands again. Impatient, increasingly hungry, increasingly radical, Douglas's journey has just begun. A journey that will lead him all the way from old-school Labour MP to founder of the New Zealand Ag Party.
Every man, woman and child in this country is paying $10 a week in interest to service that debt. Not to repay it, but to pay the interest. $50 a week for a family of 5. Can you afford that? Quite simply, we are living horribly beyond our means.
It's the nuclear issue that triggered the election, and some in the Labour Party want it to be the centrepiece of the campaign. Lange and his senior MPs, Prebble among them, disagree strongly. The economy is the thing, they say, and that's clear enough in Lange's launch speech at the Christchurch Town Hall.
Just after this election, I, as Prime Minister, will convene a New Zealand economic conference. We're going to discuss and reach consensus on the future economic direction of New Zealand. The purpose of that conference will be to assist the government to determine priorities, to open the books, to be honest, to have no reserve, to give every delegate, every group represented all the relevant facts and forecasts, to set out the problems and the policy options. We'll generate there a climate of common concern. We'll understand the scale, the scope of the current crisis in New Zealand. And every section of our community, business, unions, will clearly understand the role they must play.
The only question was, what was Labour's economic policy? Hang on, what's this?
Well, it's definitely not Chariots of Fire.
This is the National Party TV ad that goes out to living rooms around the country. There's a swimmer, there's a ballet dancer, there's an equestrian event, and there's a jogger running along the beach, and up the screen scroll the words, "Nothing unites us more as a nation than the ability to win against the odds. New Zealand, you're winning. Vote National on July 14. But how about that music? Remember in 2017 when National got into trouble over a Eminem sound-alike, which they defended as pretty legal? Well, it wasn't the first time that had happened. Here's Richard Prebble.
There was 2 big films that year. There was Chariots of Fire and Officers and a Gentleman. Our song was from Officer and a Gentleman, and the National Party's was from Chariots of Fire.
The National Party finds itself getting sued by Warner Brothers.
And we were saying, what a shameful thing.
Meanwhile, Prebble and the Labour campaign manager Simon Walker have their own problems with Up Where We Belong.
Simon Walker rang me up after our ad had gone to here and said that although we'd been given the rights by the agent in Australia, he'd just received a note from the people who really owned it in America saying no, they didn't agree. And then I rang up Bob Harvey. He was a big guru in advertising and said to Bob, "This is your day, Bob." I said, "Find this guy in America. I don't care what you say to him, but get the rights because we haven't got enough money to shoot a new ad." Bob rang them up.
We can put a date on this. It's June 26, 2.5 weeks before the election, the night of the Labour campaign launch. Bob Harvey calls the US.
We had a great conversation. It was from a phone box outside the Christchurch Town Hall, and Lange was about to enter stage right.
And he said he spoke to a gentleman in New York and said what a great party we were, and he said the person then asked, is this a Democrat or a Republican party? He didn't know what answer to give.
I hadn't a fucking clue which one I was trying to get. All I needed was the rights.
So he said, well, it's the best elements of the Democrats and the Republicans. And as he said to me, I never knew at the time how true that statement was going to be.
Harvey is only seeking clearance to use the music, not the official recording.
And I'd already recorded a whole group of young vocalists in a booth in Auckland, humming the words along do, 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 do. And I knew that the audience would break into that do, do, do.
In the Labour ad, Lange walks around the supermarket in a three-piece suit with Naomi. At one point they pass a tall shelf chocker with cartons of cigarettes.
Push a trolley around a supermarket, you'll see just how prices are going up.
The next minute he's in an office tapping at a giant computer. And finally, he's sitting at a massive wooden desk.
Major luxuries. And we'll get back the standard of living you and your family deserve.
But again, what was the economic policy?
I had done a full paper and it had gone to the policy committee. And really, if you go back, it contained pretty much most of the things that we did when we came into government.
There's a group in the party, however, among them President Jim Anderton, who balk at Douglas's vision. Peter Harris is tasked with writing an alternative.
My name's Peter Harris, and at the time of the 1984 election, I was working for the Public Services Association, the PSA, in their economics policy advocacy type team.
Harris and his allies favour what he calls a more gradualist approach.
Something a bit like what the Australians did. Change, but change in a considered and gradual way, putting in place checks and balances and protections for those who were most vulnerable.
Also on that working group is Margaret Wilson, who would go on to succeed Jim Anderton as Labour president.
The party was quite divided, I suppose, or certainly had very contestably different views, those that what we now call neoliberalism was developing, and the rest of us who really we weren't opposed to the market, but we still believed the state had a really important role. So I think it's wrong to think things were put over people's eyes or anything like that. There was a strong debate going on at the time. And then, of course, Sir Robert had a rush of something to the head and we got an early election.
With the election now just a few weeks away, Geoffrey Palmer is tasked with writing the compromise policy.
Palmer came and wrote a paper which was acceptable to everyone, I suppose, because it didn't say anything.
It was so bland, it could mean anything to anyone. Muldoon described it as a bucket full of jellyfish, which of course is exactly what it was. It would just run through your fingers. But sitting in the background was the real agenda. And after the election, that came to pass.
I think as it worked out with the snap election, it was perfect. It didn't stop me doing anything, so why wouldn't I agree? And the snap election, there was no real demand. If we'd gone another 4 months, maybe people would have demanded more from us.
Labour might only have papered over differences on policy, but it sorted its campaign tactics. While Muldoon will hurl insult after insult at his challenger, calling Lange a bumbling incompetent, a stooge of the unions, an economic illiterate, and one of those screaming pop singers, Lange refuses to bite. Here he is, speaking in 1996 for the documentary series Revolution.
About September 1983, we decided that we wanted to win. And we had a compact that we wouldn't attack the government. And we had a sub-compact that we wouldn't attack ourselves. And we presented what we consider to be the strength and organisational unity and all the body language of assurance. We were the government in exile. And such debate as we had was easily dismissed, and in fact it was resolved by having a manifesto which could appeal to the right, the left, the centre, and the totally bewildered.
Remember, these are the days of first past the post, of two big parties and a few minnows. Bruce Beetham and Social Credit are in the mix, Maturata, a former Labour MP, is leading Mana Motuhake and struggling to get much media attention. Then there's the New Zealand Party, led by Bob Jones, a self-made millionaire property tycoon. His ambition, more than anything else, is to see national turfed out.
Our traditional free society has been converted to a Polish-style command economy. Ladies and gentlemen, if you believe in freedom and if you believe that people know best how to run their lives, not politicians, and if you believe in the private enterprise system, then there's only one private enterprise party, and that's the New Zealand Party.
Authorised by C.W. Beck, Director-General of the New Zealand Party, Wellington.
The New Zealand Party will go on to win more than 12% of the vote. These days, under MMP, that would win you about 16 seats. But back then, under first past the post and without winning an electorate, the New Zealand Party won nothing. The morning after the snap election is announced, Judith Fyfe and Hugo Manson, a pair of oral historians at Wellington, have an idea. It's a campaign, they think, that looks like it'll be worth chronicling. They managed to persuade most of the party leaders to take part in near daily conversations about campaign trail life. Muldoon, alas, quits after the first one, during which he seems incensed by a question about his health. But the Lange conversations are fascinating. Parts of the interviews, conducted by phone with microphones duct taped to handsets, will get transcribed in the post-election book The Gamble. But the audio has never been heard. Until now. Here's David Lange on June 29.
We had the advantage in that on the snap election night calling, I knew something was up, kept people behind, and we actually had a prepared position, a strategy worked out for when the government announced the thing. I went to a press conference in a sober, measured way, dealt with the issues which the electorate was about. We never lost our momentum from then. We had a strategy to handle that, and we have, despite a week of the most extraordinary efforts at diversion, ranging from All Black tours to abortion, we just simply have kept on course and not gone into being deflected into arguing the government's agenda. We have had the pleasure, therefore, of seeing the government reacting to ours.
A few days later, on July the 4th, there are 10 days to go until the election.
I noticed him on television tonight, just simply almost manic, screaming about me. So he's got me good.
How do you feel about that when you see him mocking and ridiculing?
Oh, that's actually very good. It fits into the strategy very well.
This is July 7th.
How important do you think this television debate with you and the Prime Minister tomorrow night is going to be?
Oh, I don't think he's building it up as if it's some sort of great importance. That's simply his style. When the poll came out, he said that was a week that the National Party wasn't doing well, and at the time he said they were winning handsomely. He is the best man I know at rewriting history. It means that if I were to go there, drop my trousers, commit Harry-Carry, abuse Johnson and kick Muldoon in the vitals, I'd probably lose the election. But if I'm still there after 55 minutes, we'll win.
Good evening, and welcome to the Two Leaders debate. With me are the two best known...
This is the only head-to-head debate of the campaign. It's an odd, slightly unnerving affair. You can watch it in full on New Zealand On Screen. Muldoon is at his best in challenging Lange on ANZUS, but for the most part he has a kind of deflated air, hunched on his chair, hands clasped on his lap. Lange doesn't drop his trousers or abuse the moderator, but there's this odd, almost bewitching note at the end. In his closing 90-second statement, Lange launches into a healing theme.
The fact is that we have a choice in this country of hating people, or we have a choice in this country of bringing people together.
And then he praises Muldoon and praises the National Party, exhorts both to be part of that unifying moment. It ends like this.
And I say to you, sir, that you are the person who could lead that recovery back within your ranks, because I believe that your party has an honourable tradition, and I think that there are people in it who are prepared to be part of that recovery.
Thank you.
I give them, after July 15, the chance to do that.
Thank you very much, Mr.
I love
Lange.
you, Mr. Lange.
Thank you.
I love you, Mr. Lange. He's mocking his opponent's mawkishness, sure, but there's also something maudlin, melancholy, defeated about it all. Here's Lange the next day.
That was meant sincerely when he said, I love you, Mr. Lange.
I don't know. I was completely mystified by that, which is why I kept talking to him after the show went off the air. And it seems to me that there was some sort of peculiar attempt to portray me as some sort of person that wanted that sort of response. I don't know. But in the end, he seems to me to be a bit of a mess.
According to Lange, perhaps with a dash of poetic licence, Muldoon went home after that debate to Vogel House, the official Prime Minister's residence in Lower Hutt, and dug up his beloved lilies. With a few days to go, it doesn't feel close, recalls Richard Harman, who was then reporting for Television New Zealand.
And the week before the election, Muldoon was doing one of his speeches, I think at the St James in Auckland, and quite a few gallery journalists and people who had returned to Auckland from the gallery, we all got together on the grounds that we thought this would be the last Muldoon speech. And we went to the speech, and I remember all of us ceremoniously throwing the speech notes into a skip bin down Queen Street on our way down to a pub, thinking, well, we're never going to need them again.
Did he know that it was over?
Oh, I'm absolutely certain he did, yeah. During the campaign itself, he became more and more introverted, low-key, and he was left with very few friends. He had become very isolated.
It's election night, July 14th, 1984. Power is about to shift from Muldoon's National to Lange's Labour. Consecutive governments full of drama and contradiction, consecutive governments that have been variously fudged, disregarded, and even renounced by their parties since.
The Prime Minister has conceded the election to Labour in a surprise move a few minutes ago. Sir Robert said Labour would be a one-term government, and he says his own political future will be as leader of the opposition. David Lange will now be the country's youngest Prime Minister since Julius Vogel in 1876.
A jubilant David Lange is swarmed by supporters at the Mangere Metro Theatre. He's in a dark suit with a red carnation on the lapel. A giant red curtain at the back of the stage reads Labour, bringing New Zealand together.
We understand that reporter Rebecca Scott is talking with David Lange at the Auckland headquarters at the moment. Rebecca
Mr. Lange,
Scott.
how do you feel about that?
I feel quite moved by that. That's something which doesn't often happen. I think that was a very gracious call, and I'm sure that Naomi had the same grace in the telephone call from Lady Muldoon.
What did the Prime Minister say to you?
He congratulated me, said we'd won. He talked of the start of the next campaign come Monday, and I'm going to see him on Monday.
How does it feel to Lange on that stage, speaking as Prime Minister-elect to elated supporters? Feels good, of course, but also, here he is in the oral history recording.
People don't know, but the hall that I stood on as the Prime Minister is the stage that I played a block of cheese in. I was a block of cheese with legs in a primary school function. You see, not many people have done that. And I thought of that when I was standing up there too, which doesn't make particularly good television. It looks a bit distracted.
Lange has other worries. A couple of calls he takes on a phone wired up at the back of the Mangere Hall contain in miniature a portent of storms to come. One is from George Shultz, the US Secretary of State, who's with Bob Hawke in Canberra ahead of an ANZUS summit in Wellington. Shortly afterwards comes another. It's that concession call from Muldoon, with a twist.
The outgoing Prime Minister said, "Congratulations, I've got some bad news for you tomorrow." and sort of, I thought, oh, gosh, that's it. So he hung up then. And I knew that things were up. I mean, there was nothing to cause one's euphoria to sort of wither and shrivel than that.
That bad news? The state of the government books. They knew it was dire, but not this dire.
I went through the election campaign telling people how bad the economy was and exaggerating within the bounds of what still rhetoric enables you to have, only to discover after the election that I had understated the situation significantly.
In episode 2 of Juggernaut, the story of the Fourth Labour government, reality bites. A rejected Prime Minister refuses to cede power. A financial and constitutional crisis puts the nation at risk. And the fuse is lit on an economic revolution. Juggernaut, the story of the fourth Labour government, is written and presented by me, Toby Manhire, for the Spin-Off Podcast Network, made with the support of New Zealand On Air. The producer is Sophie Dowson, the audio editor and sound designer is Tiahe Butler, the researchers are Hannah Lou and Rachel Judkins, the graphic designer is Archie Banal, and the executive producers are Duncan Grieve and Jane Yee. Archival audio in this episode is from the RNZ collection at Ngā Taonga Sound and Vision in the Alexander Turnbull Library. You can read a full list of sources and a bunch of other written material that digs deeper into the story by clicking the link in the show notes. Thanks to Judith Fife, Linda Evans, Pip Oldham, Steve Russell, Finlay McDonald, Amber Easby, Mad Chapman, Anna Rafferty Connell, Jen Follett, Isaiah Tua, Ben Fagan, Bernard Hickey, Box Cutter, and everyone who made the time to speak with us. Kia ora, this is Toby Manhire. Thank you for listening to Juggernaut. I hope you're enjoying this series. A lot of work from a small but talented group of people went into making this podcast, and we're extremely grateful to New Zealand On Air for supporting the project. It also couldn't have happened without the support of our members. If you like what we do here at The Spin-Off and would like to see more projects like Juggernaut out in the world, then please consider becoming a Spin-Off member. Visit thespinoff.co.nz/members to help us do more of the work you value.
Are you making the most of your KiwiSaver investment? Generate is an award-winning KiwiSaver provider with a track record of strong long-term performance. Making a smart decision now could add tens of thousands of dollars by the time you reach retirement. Book a no-obligation chat with a Generate KiwiSaver advisor today at generatekiwisaver.co.nz/get-advice. A copy of the product disclosure statement is available at generatekiwisaver.co.nz. The issuer of the scheme is Generate Investment Management Limited, and of course, past performance does not guarantee future returns.
The Spin-Off Podcast Network.